little prologue or a little prelude to what we're going to do today, just because what we're going to do today is rather head-oriented. And I want to talk a little bit about the heart so that we don't lose touch of that. In fact, going from the title page to the first section of the Cosmo Conception, which we're going to do today, in between there is, in fact, a little prologue. And in that prologue, it talks about the dangers of being too head-oriented, because the head, the thinking process, is extremely separative, whereas the qualities of the heart, the feeling processes, those are very unifying. It's not often that two people think together. In fact, it's a rather difficult thing. That's separative, it's isolating, and especially when the thought is focused in the material world, because the material world itself is so discrete, and there are so many ramifications and divisions in it that we even think that our universes are different from each other. And, I do my thing, you do your thing, that kind of a philosophy. And the Rosicrucian Fellowship has been instituted for people who are, in fact, too head-oriented and not enough heart-oriented. I've been studying with the Rosicrucian Fellowship about 33 years, and I've watched a lot of people come and go. I have yet to see a world-class mind that would be superlative in every sense, but there have been some pretty good minds attracted to the Rosicrucian organization. Most do not affiliate, which is sort of a problem. I think you're getting feedback from the earphone. Oh, it's a hearing aid. All right. But most of the extremely bright people, because they are so head-oriented, do not affiliate at all because they are so separative. In fact, some of the brightest minds that I've seen attracted to our teaching have stayed away from affiliation. We've not had any great scholars, any world-class scholars either. But nonetheless, everyone that I have seen attracted to the organization is predominantly head-oriented. And that is perfectly fine if we take the Rosicrucian philosophy to give the answers to our head so that we can relax and begin to follow our heart. Unfortunately, that hasn't happened. And it's been a very sad thing. It's been very difficult for the responsibilities that have been given to us to carry out in the world, because what has happened is where the principle of the heart is love. Not just emotional love, but a love that transcends even ideas. We'll talk about it in a couple days, but it is that universal Christ love in which everything is in unison. Head-oriented people think. And when they think, they put their values in principles. And when we get in disagreements with each other, we say, it's a matter of principle. And that has led to a lot of continuous division. And sometimes what we have attempted to do is we have attempted to unify people through a unified dogma. That's been tried many times in history, and using the same words with supposedly exactly the same meaning has never brought any unity. The only thing that brings unity is if you are in a common spirit. There is no way that any philosophy or any dogma can dictate unity. However, if we are together in love, that can't fail. So the keynote, which for the beginning, or the prologue of the Rosicrucian cosmoconception is listen to the heart. There have been 80-some years now since the Rosicrucian Fellowship has been born, and we know from very painful experience that love has to transcend any principle. No principle, no philosophy, no dogma can ever do what love can do. And love never fails. All right, now we have to get down to the material of the day. This is the first of 3 talks that are put together as one, and it is called What is an Aura? And the official formal title is Rosicrucian Cosmography, Spiritual Worlds in Macrocosm and Microcosm. So we're going to start talking about spiritual worlds. It'll go very slow today because we have a lot of difficult things that we're going to breeze through really fast, but it's still going to go slow. Cosmography is a mapping or an organization of the cosmos. It is part of another term called cosmology. And cosmology means the organization or the logic of the cosmos. Anytime you see a word that ends with ology, it goes back to the word logos or logos, which is the ancient Greek designation for the realm of life spirit, which is the realm of Christ consciousness. That one word from which all things have come into existence. It also means something on a much higher level, but I don't want to get too far away from that, too far into the spiritual world. So we're going to look at the way the spiritual worlds are laid out. Yesterday, as we were closing talking about the differences between materialism and mysticism, we noted that there are no accidents, that there is a divine cause and consequence so that everything happens just as it should happen, but that it is not a cold, hard justice, but that it is a fulfillment of creative love, so that even the most heinous things that seem to happen in our lives or in the world are in fact quite benign activities, and they are to our good. And we concluded yesterday that since we live in the Western world, that it's not an accident that we've been put here. And having the scientific method and skepticism and doubt and all of those things, they're part of us, and we can't undo that. And therefore we should look at the spiritual philosophy of the Rosicrucians in such a way that it answers to that part of our being. In short, what we said is we should start where we are right now, right here. And so what we'll do that now is we'll apply that same thing by beginning looking at the spiritual world by looking at this one, the one in which we are perceiving each other. In the Bible, and we use it a lot in our Rosicrucian Temple service, we say, if we can't love what we see, how can we love what we don't see? And basically that's what we're going to do today. We're going to look at the physical world, all of it, according to the Rosicrucian philosophy, which includes the solids, liquids, gases, and 4 ethers. However, there's always a but or a however. It's going to take a good half hour to get to that. In order to understand cosmography, we have to have a little bit of an idea of the entire layout. It is true, as the ancient, I believe it's a Chinese statement that says that a journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step, and that we have to begin step by step from where we are. However, if we're going to climb a mountain, which is really what we're doing in these three talks, if we're going to climb a mountain, it's very prudent to look the mountain over before we begin. In fact, if you take mountains that are frequently climbed, like the Matterhorn or Mount Everest, yes. I was thinking the other one to it, the mountain of Durga. K2, yes. Those mountains are known, they've been photographed from every angle. And if mountaineers are going to attempt to climb the mountain, they're looking at what approach they're going to take. You know, at this season of the years, the winds are coming this way, so it would be imprudent to take this path and such like that. So what I want to do is I want to look at the basic philosophical ideas that go into Rosicrucian cosmography. Now, Max Heindel says, somewhere in the Rosicrucian cosmoconception, in the early going, he says that Rosicrucian philosophy is dualism. And right there we hit a loaded word. What academic philosophers mean by dualism is that there are two worlds, a world of mind and a world of matter, and they have the famous mind-body problem. The two don't meet. It gets more elaborate than that when you get to materialists, when you get to Carl Jung, for example. Carl Jung has several parallel realms, but he says there is no vertical connection between them, because if there was a vertical connection between them, we would have magic. And we all know that magic doesn't work. Boom. Right there, he closed the door. So when the philosopher speaks of dualism, the academic philosopher, is speaking of two worlds that parallel each other but may or may not meet. The term dualism has been used in other ways. Like, for example, the ancient Persian mysteries were dualistic, in that there were two worlds, one that was warm and light, and it was filled with goodness and of spirit. That was the world of Urzmad. Then there was the other world, which was dark and cold and materialistic, and it was evil. And that was the world of Ahriman, and that there was a continuous struggle between good and evil, between light and dark, between warm and cold, and the outcome was always uncertain. It's not that kind of dualism we're speaking of either. There's great wisdom in all of that, but it is an archaic notion that doesn't apply as we see it. The Rosicrucian philosophy claims that there is a oneness. And within that oneness, in order to create, there is an internal division and polarization. And that internal division and polarization never loses touch with the oneness. It is called the spirit-matter continuum. So that the more you go in one direction along the continuum, the more you are in the realms of spirit. The more you proceed in the other direction, the more you are externalized into realms of matter. The dualism that is the Rosicrucian philosophy is also a reflective dualism, so that what happens in matter is the inverse of what is happening in spirit, so that what transpires in spirit will have some consequence in matter, and what we experience in matter will have some ramification in our spiritual being. Now I'm going to leave it that light because we could go. We're on something that we could talk for at least 4 or 5 hours on something that is very, very deep. So if you're an academic philosopher and you like academic terms and jargon, I'll tell you what the Rosicrucian philosophy would be described in academic jargon. It would be a bipolar neutral monism, unlimited in internal or external dimensionality. Yeah, the academics love the word. Now, we're trying to get to here, which is what we call the actual or the manifest reality. Now we have to deal with an unspeakable thing. I know everybody's going to walk out of here and say, that guy was talking about unspeakable things. Yeah. We're all going to be guilty of it. The Rosicrucian philosophy talks about 3 states. The absolute, the potential, and the actual or manifest. The absolute is the part that is unspeakable. It is everything that is and everything that isn't, and there are no words. It is infinitely rare, rarer than even spirit, but it is also infinitely dense at the same time. It is absolutely cold, like absolute zero, but it is absolutely hot at the same time. So it's absolutely everything that is true and everything that is not true. Not untrue or false, but not true. If you like logical opposites, it's that. Always, throughout all history, each of us has a connection with the absolute. And those who have come to know of its existence have had 2 symbols for the absolute. One is silence, and the other is absolute darkness, because it is the unknown. It is completely unknown. Am I not speaking loud enough? Okay, I'm sorry. I trailed off in my speech there. Between the absolute and the actual is potential. And potential is a realm of possibility. It is the ground of becoming. It gets a little tricky. It's like saying that because something could be, it is. It's something that mystical and academic philosophers have pondered for years, but potential represents the realm, or they can't even say a realm. It represents possibility from what is absolute and from what is manifest. It is the realm of possibility between them. Now, the Rosicrucian philosophy treats it very much like material science, the realm of potential, but it is much, much deeper in its conception. The idea of potential is, again, there's one potential, but it has 2 characteristics, or a pole of potential, you might say. And the 2 potentials are, in one direction, time, in the other direction, space. So you can, in the direction of time, is more associated with spirit. In the direction of space, we are more associated with matter. So what we're talking about when we're time and space are two facets. They're interdependent of the state of potential which is between the absolute and the manifest. They are, so to speak, the womb of all becoming, the womb of all birth of everything that is in existence. So the Rosicrucian philosophy doesn't make a big point of diagrams and things about it, but speaks of then the absolute and of the potential of time and space, which becomes manifest as a continuum of spirit and matter. Now, if you like definitions, again, academic kinds of definitions, I'll give you an academic definition. Time is the state of potential which is capable of bearing intensive relationships. Space is the state of potential which is capable of bearing extensive relationships. When we speak about relationships, when we think about space, we think normally about a room like this, and then we extend another room and another room. Space is just a potential. What we're doing there is extensively stretching out the room of space. It is our creation that is filling the potential, because absolute has the capability of everything in it. Okay. And the same thing when we say that before this, what was before that, or what was before that, if we follow back in antecedents, this is something that has always happened with all spiritual people, with all spiritual beings. There is always looking upward to see what was before me. He that cometh after me is preferred before me because he was before me. And we'll always, it's like going back to find the source of a river. In the most primitive tribes in the world, that rings up and that lights up in the consciousness because they know they're going back to a source. And so when we have an intensive relationship, like the relationship of time, what was before me in spirit, we are looking at that kind of a relationship. But potential can handle any kind of relationship. Like a brother-in-law, that's a relationship. And as silly as that may sound, there are the things that, what we have in our consanguine relationships or our in-law relationships really are pointing to the kinds of relationships that are in our spiritual consciousness. So, when we talk about people are in a triangle, that's a spatial figure to describe something that is, a triangle is, we put that in space, to describe a relationship between three people. And such like that. All right, so I understand a lot of you this is not quite exactly in sync with what you want to do, but we've just now looked at potential and we'll get on to the actual. All right. This brings us to where we actually are right now in the material world. Now we're going to do something terrible. We're going to make a drawing. And in this drawing, we're going to, it's something like the drawing on page 52 of the Rosicrucian Cosmoconception. And to stay with all spiritual teachings of all ages, we'll begin with the focus of the absolute. It's black, it's dark, it's empty, it's a black dot. Instead of a black box, it's a black dot. We're looking at this only with regard to our solar cosmos. If we got to something much more grand than that, it would go so far beyond our consciousness that it would be chaotic and we would not be able to clearly understand it at all. We would be in a daze. We would be amazed by the depth of it all. Now, according to the Rosicrucian philosophy, around the connection, whether it is God's connection to the absolute or whether it is our connection to the absolute, it is usually focused through the center of mind. And this produces a horizon. And again, whether the being is self or whether it is God as the sun, the center of the whole business, it's usually put in some kind of aura. And since the mind works both as a mirror and as a lens, it's often pictured like this as an oratorio, as the eye in the center of all being. This horizon is the horizon between the phenomenal world. Now, if this goes too fast for you, don't worry, because we're going to be talking about this for 3 days now. The phenomenal world and these are the transcendental. Yes. These are the realms that are more material. These are those that are more spiritual. What marks the difference between the phenomenal and the transcendental world is that the phenomenal worlds have limits, whereas the spiritual, the realms of pure spirit are unlimited. So this then represents the tree of life of the whole cosmos. It is the spirit matter pole. And there are various gradations going from the grossest matter like this to the most rare spirit, and they are all part of a unity. And they all pass right through that center of the horizon. Things in this direction are more outward. Things in this direction are more inward. It's just a general way of looking at things. I think we've got enough. Things in this direction are more unknown or unconscious in some ways. In this direction, things are more known and there's more waking consciousness. What? You know what? I never turned my mic on. I think I'm going to have to borrow from you. Am I even taking? Yeah, no, I'm taking. I do this every. Am I even taking? Yeah, no, I'm taking. I do this every now and then. I miss altogether. All right. Now we've got a rough layout. Now we get into some very, very interesting things. Basically, this rough layout works in large and in small. Yes, sir?
Did you mean to switch those around? The known with the phenomenal?
No, the unknown is with the phenomenal and the known is with the spirit.
Really?
Yes. This is a gigantic experiment for God. It is the part of the unknown of the absolute. I'll say this really fast because it's something very, very deep. When the Supreme Being awakens and knows itself, it knows that there's something unknown in the absolute. And that division between the known or the self and the unknown of the absolute produces a dualism. And that dualism becomes internalized so that there is a known and an unknown. And there is spirit and matter. So the whole of the creation that we are part of, this is going to sound very childish, is God is playing make-believe for keeps. That is, the divine projects a dream. and it projects that dream into the unknown. And when the known interfaces with the unknown, there is a congealment in space of the ignorance. So as much as it is a creation, as far as the creation of the dream, it is also an experiment. The Supreme Being, or God, or you and I, our lives are a creation before we come to birth, but it's also an experiment. That it is in the process of interacting with the unknown in matter, and vigorously interacting, playing for keeps, trying to manifest the dream, but because we're ignorant of the unknown, it fights back, it resists. We don't know what it is, but in the process of interacting with it, we digest it, and we take it as soul into our being, and the unknown becomes known. So that the material world, in this sense, though I understand what you're saying when you ask the question, it's just a different way of looking at what is known and unknown. We're going to come to what you're saying in just a little bit when I talk about conscious and unconscious. All right. So that is, all right, I guess that should be enough for that. We could be awfully long today. Oh boy. So, all right, I'm going to pass on something here. I'm going to have to edit and cut and do things like that, or we'll be here awfully long. Now, we're right at where your question is. Boy, you must really be tuning in. Now, the Rosicrucian philosophy has some very interesting, very curious, very engaging ideas about this cosmos that we live in. Material science, as we looked at yesterday, says this is all there is. And looking around in all that there is here, we're at the top of evolution. However, one of the most, in order to truly enter the spiritual worlds and do so with sanity, you have to do so with humility. Because otherwise, if you're proud and egoistic, it'll just tear you apart to enter into the spiritual worlds. And one of the first things that happens is you are humbled. Because according to this view, our existence here, even though we are king of the hill in the outer world, this is sort of a quarantine for us, or it's sort of an exile that we have. And when we awaken to all of this and all of the beings that are manifest in this, we're relatively low in our consciousness and in our evolution. So the Rosicrucian teaching says humanity is not the top or the first fruits of evolution. There are beings that are way beyond us in consciousness. And we're relatively low down in the whole business. In fact, the differences even among ourselves are negligible. Negligible. It's something like the world. If we think about Mount Everest, I've had it reminded to me now, or the Mariana Deep, they seem like they're a great promontory or something really deep. But the Earth, if you take the surface of the Earth relative to its diameter, it's so smooth that we can't make a ball bearing as smooth as the surface of the Earth is. It's that smooth. It's a matter of proportion. And so when we say to somebody, well, I'm smarter than you, or you love more than me, negligible. It's like the Himalaya mountains. It means nothing relative to the whole surface. Yes?
How long has that concept of the smoothness of the Earth been in? Well, how long has it been conceptualized?
I would say at least a century ago, physicists have taken the exact measurements of it.
Seems to me back about 30, maybe 40, 45 years ago, I heard a teacher say that And I was only a teenager.
It's been around at least a century.
If you took the entire Earth and boiled it down and smoothed it out, wherever the highs and lows, the peaks and the valleys, and the hards and the softs, it would come out as...
No, you don't even have to iron it out. It's smooth already. It's so smooth that little blip on that is we can't even smooth. Yeah, we can't even smooth the ball bearing down so that it doesn't have blips that big, because the Earth is huge. Yes, sir.
Taking out a razor blade edge under a microscope, you'd never shave with the thing I saw.
Yes, exactly. Yes. All right. I like the participation. We're going to go awfully slow because of it, but now, not only does the Rosicrucian philosophy humble us by saying that we're relatively low in evolution, it says that we're relatively unconscious. As much as we think we're awake and as much as we think we're sharp, that relative to all of the inner worlds in which we are functioning while we're here, we're pretty unconscious. We're sleepwalkers. And if that isn't enough for you, the Rosicrucian philosophy says that even in this body, we're mostly unconscious. The digestion, which is an alchemical process, is run perfectly by spirit without our participation. And, we're not aware of our breathing. We're not aware of most of the functions that are taking place in our body. The interactions between sodium, potassium, a constant interchange, a delicate balance, and it's vibrating at a very high rate within our consciousness. And, things like Krebs cycles, which take thousandths of a second in the metabolic process of every cell. We're not aware of it. Spirit is, but we're not aware. But then you say, but at least I can see each of you. Rosicrucian philosophy says, even with regard to the physical world that we hear, see, touch with all of our senses, we're unawake. So that if we can, to some extent we're awake. We walk down the path here and we see the birds are beautiful and the flowers are beautiful. The grounds really look great. Oh, there's some lovely little gardens by the healing building over there, just smashing. But we think we're awake to what's going on, but we're not. If we took a geologist along with us, the geologist would open our eyes to things we never knew were there. Or if we took a botanist or a zoologist, it would be the same thing. Or if we took a painter who could see things, or if we took a poet that could get some of the ideas that are more spiritual ideas, we would realize that we're not even clairvoyant in the physical world. So the Rosicrucian philosophy, very much like the spiritual worlds themselves, make sure that we get humbled right away from the beginning. It's a real humiliation. It's almost like the humiliation. Before I had completely read the Cosmo, I cast my horoscope, and I had a copy of Message of Stars. I did it with a cookbook. I think it's probably the last horoscope I ever did with a cookbook. But it was embarrassing because I was less than 2 weeks away from being an atheist, and to my shock, astrology worked. The double whammy was that all of those bad things that were in there were really there. When you start, you have to really want to face some things to come to the truth. All right. So, really, we should perpetually be in awe and in gratitude. Just, it's so nice after getting off the freeway to get here and look at the faces that are here, because the faces that are here, you know what I mean? There's a loving and a knowing that is in them. But really, even on the freeway, where it's the hardest place, that's where the way really is. Grace is giving somebody a break when they don't deserve it. And you're coming to one of those places where there's road construction ahead and all these people are cutting around on the side trying to get ahead, and they want to come jamming in there, and you have the choice of trying to crunch their fenders or whatever, and you have to let them in because you realize that even for us, grace is giving us a break. You're looking for somebody.
Sorry, is Jim in here?
Yes, he is.
Which Jim?
Jim Noel.
No, Jim is at a meeting.
Okay, thank you.
So what it really is that we should be in awe and in appreciation all the time. But what happens? The same thing that happens with the people that we love the most, the people that we marry, we tend to take them for granted. We take the material world for granted as though we knew all about that, and unless we run into somebody like a Newton that says, why did that apple hit me on the head? Why don't things fall up? We really don't come to investigate things. So I even believe that just the appreciation alone is enough to open us up to spiritual reality. That just by loving things and caring for things, it opens us up. Another thing that happens is we're somewhat awake in these realms, and we have intellectual knowledge, and we know it's a great temptation when we get into a teaching like this. We know that there are spiritual worlds, and we say, why am I not awake in those spiritual worlds? I deserve it. And then we sort of, in our egoism, we look derisively on this world, because in this world we can only see the surface, and we can only see it from one point of view at a time, not realizing that this is the most important thing. It's where the surface, where everything happens. If you take the villi in the lungs, or if you take the way the kidneys work with the nets, or if you take the way things go in and out of the cells, everything in the body depends on the surface. And it's very good for us to be able to have one point of view very objectively, to be able to read the surface or the face of God to understand what is behind. Because otherwise, when we enter into the spiritual worlds, we could just be pulled this way and that way, almost like a balloon in a tornado or something like that, because we don't have that objectivity. It's true that the objectivity that we're learning here, we're going to expand that to the spiritual worlds, but we have to have it here first. And so there's nothing really wrong with us having a surface viewpoint of things. It isn't necessarily that isn't necessarily a bad thing. Oh, I got such dense notes here, and it's hard to read. I put in about 130 hours just putting the notes together for these series of talks, and I'm putting in about 3 hours a day reviewing, so that I'm there are so many things. One of the our egoism, as we have entered into this physical world or this material world, as we saw yesterday, has led us into a very divided consciousness. So divided that in order to keep on evolving and to keep the species going, to keep humanity going, we have to divide between males and females so that part of our energy can be used for keeping the forms of existence going in this world, while the other part is turned inward and upward to develop ourselves. So this division, where we have gone exclusively external, where we see the whole reality as outward, This division has caused a serious division in our consciousness. When the Bible says, for example, that the wages of sin are death, it's talking about a very profound principle. And that is, by going into such a one-sided thing, we see things as dead. We see them externalized as dead, and it pervades our entire consciousness. Every process that we have now for gaining knowledge, short of spiritual development like the Rosicrucian development, is deathly knowledge. We tear things apart. We can't see through them as they are. We tear things apart. We kill things. Everything in our knowledge is deathly. It's very, very separative. And the egoism and the arrogance that is behind us, we actually believe that we have a right to do this. It's all in the name of science. In fact, all of our knowledge of even the etheric worlds as energy coming through physics, physics does not see whole energy. Everything in physics, whether it is atomic particles, is in a state of decay. We can only understand decay. It's called, it has to do with the second law of thermodynamics. It has to do with entropic systems. And okay, now, the result of this deathly kind of existence is that we have a partitioned consciousness. We're reasonably awake externally, but we're not awake spiritually. And because we have this divided consciousness, one of the certain things that indicates our sinful and fallen nature is that we have to make the same dumb mistakes over again and again and again. If we hadn't fallen, I believe we could have gone right through this material world in such a way that we would have needed many less replications to learn the same lesson. However, even this turns out to be good, because the more times we do things, the more the repetitions actually lead to harmonies in our etheric body, and everything in the etheric body is done by rhythms and harmonies and waves. Anybody who loves to take naps, I try to run a really hard life. I try to run 18 hours a day, but I have to take a little nap now and then, sometimes even a 30-second nap. And what I do is, it's sort of like the surfers. I catch another wave coming along through the etheric body, and then you know, it's just down and up, and it works just nicely. All right. Now, in order to understand the material world as the Rosicrucian philosophy sees it, we have to understand that in the spirit-matter pole, the unity is not lost in such a way that the one, or the oneness at the very top, is maintained all the way through. This is called, by one name, it's called the principle of analogy. That is, what happens in the one happens at every level downward and outward from the one. The principle of analogy was best stated by a 6th century alchemist in Rome, and it's famous. One of the most famous quotes, I don't know the name of the alchemist, I could look it up. In fact, if you have need any references, I can give you references for anything that is quoted here, but I'm slow and it may take you a long time. But the Hermetic axiom, as stated by the Roman alchemist, goes, as above, so below. What has gone before in heaven will follow after on earth. Know this and rejoice. This is to say, then, that the oneness of God is found on every plane within God. I think we all discovered that for ourselves, even though we didn't have the Rosicrucian philosophy. We discovered it when we were about in 6th grade, and we got to learn what atoms were like, and we found out that atoms had a center and had all kinds of things going around it. And then we found out that a solar system had a center and all of the things going around it. And we said, aha, an atom is analogous to a solar system, that they both have the same kind of body in space. And that was our first, at least that's what it was for me. I don't remember much at grade school. I do remember trying to learn how to write and how terrible it was. And I do remember that I was very benignly given a D with 4 minuses behind it. I still have the, in arithmetic. And I went to college and became a math major. But I didn't do so well there either because I never learned arithmetic. I loved the ideas, but I hated the details. Don't bother me with the details. So this is the principle then that God does not get lost in God's own creation. So that as there are more and more ramifications, and when we come to this world, things are very intricate, and there are worlds within worlds, God never loses because that same unity of analogy is maintained all the way through. Now, corollary to this principle, in the Rosicrucian philosophy is a very interesting notion, and it is the notion that is in the subtitle of this talk, in macrocosm and microcosm. This means that the basic structure, the basic idea of the whole cosmos is not only found on every plane of existence by analogy, but every being, no matter how grand or how unevolved, is a microcosm of the one, of God. This is another way of saying that we as human beings, in our total existence, which we're going to be looking at for the next 3 days, we are little replicas of the macrocosm. Beautiful notions. They're not exclusive to the Rosicrucian philosophy, but I found them best developed in the Rosicrucian philosophy. So even though we're dealing with something very abstruse, something very complicated, something very hard to work with, we can never lose our way, provided we always keep in touch with the one. If you keep in touch with the one, then you have the as above, so below. You're always held together. Oh boy. So, the macrocosmic body of God. Remember, we're staying on the solar system level. In the different bodies of God, or the different planes of existence in the macrocosm, those are called in the Rosicrucian philosophy worlds. So we have a physical world, and we have a desire world, and we have a world of thought. So I just want to keep the terminology clear. And usually in the Rosicrucian philosophy, the names that are given to the world are either descriptive or they are primarily descriptive of function. That is, what function they have, especially as the function relates to human evolution and unfoldment in the whole process. All right. We're almost here. We're almost here in the physical material world. Now, the Rosicrucian philosophy, as long as we're talking about all the... I'm just awed at the notions that are in the Rosicrucian philosophy. You go over it again and again and again, and each time something new comes out. The Rosicrucian philosophy has a very curious notion about the physical body of God, or the physical world. It is not continuous. the physical body of God is wherever matter has been congealed. That means the physical body of God is almost like Osiris or like Dionysus, cut up into pieces. This is certainly part of the physical body of God, but so is Venus and so is Mars, and there are big spaces. So like as above, so below works, but our physical body, it wouldn't be a good idea to try to detach our legs at this point. The physical body of God is a little bit different in the macrocosm than it is in the microcosm. Now, there is a difference in function between the macrocosmic direction or the spiritual direction on the spirit-matter pole in function. The deeper one goes into matter, the more one is dependent, and the more one gives service by details. The more one goes to the macrocosmic direction, the more general things are. It's almost like the way things go with our professions. We learn something and we're a good worker, and then we get promoted. And we can't keep the same mentality as we had when we were a worker. Because if we try to do all the work ourselves, instead of delegating it to other people and spreading our consciousness out to other people, we would be a poor executive if we did something like that. We have to give other people the chance to do something, and our consciousness is better spread out. Well, the Rosicrucian philosophy teaches that in the macrocosm, God creates the worlds. But all of the creatures that use the worlds, they're the ones that make specific microcosmic bodies. And it is a very complex thing. So like if we take the physical world, we actually build our bodies out of the body of God. We can't say that, that even looking at mountains or plains or things like that, I just drove all the way across the country, and it's really great to see the way one kind of landscape folds into another, and you can see what leads to sodbuster mentality or the cowboy mentality. If you got mountains and bare rocks in front of you, it makes a much more sporty type of character, and you have nothing to look at but plain and green all day long. It's a really different kind of consciousness. But at any rate, if we look at the physical body of the earth, it's not, there aren't fingernails for the function of fingernails, or there aren't eyeballs or something like that. It's very undifferentiated. And it is up to the creatures to differentiate it. The plants, the animals, the humans, and other beings. So the Rosicrucian philosophy says, relative to all the spiritual worlds, that the macrocosm represents some pure, unconditioned state of those worlds, and then God is a great creator, because a composer gives the musicians a chance to interpret, and in some case even gives the musicians a chance to improvise within the structure of the great composition. So God, as God relates to the worlds, gives the stuff, and we get to work out the details. But there's something really wonderful in this. It could be called the law of service. Everything is useful and everything serves. Because God shared the dream with us and shares the basic substance with us, and we get the wonderful opportunity to participate in that. In turn, as each of us experiences all of the details and brings them back to the source, or as each of us unfolds our own divinity, God gets to see all of the potential that was in us in the first place. So there is a mutual service between us and the macrocosm that carries throughout the entirety of creation. Okay. Oh boy, I'm probably lost from my notes here already. Oh, look at that. We're halfway through today's notes. We're going to have to go very fast, or we're going to have to cut or do something like that. Oh, boy. Well, the cutting is going to start taking place very rapidly. Now, let's continue with some of the basic principles instead of going into a lot of details about the physical world, which we all think we know anyway, but we really don't. And the Rosicrucian philosophy has another principle that is very important as far as the worlds are concerned. The Rosicrucian philosophy says that before you can manifest or create or do anything in any world, you have to have sprung from that world. It's almost like the mythological term of autothonians. That is to say that before we can do anything with the physical world, we have to have a physical body. And that physical body we as spiritual consciousnesses had to spring from the physical existence of the world itself. For us, this goes way back in evolution, which I don't want to get into because that would be an extremely long topic. But our physical body right now is pretty much separate from the physical world. We can jump up in the air and even be separated from it. We can't quite fly like the birds yet. But in order for us to appreciate the physical world, we have to have a body that relates to it. Now, the Rosicrucian philosophy has some really far-off notions about this. It says there are worlds that are even denser than this one. But because we haven't evolved relative to them, we can't know them. It's as if to say that God doesn't waste the creation on just one set of things. Everything that we're going to talk about this whole week or the whole 2 weeks is going to be utterly awesome. But that isn't all there is to it. It's all that we can have the experience of because we've had that evolution. God doesn't waste the time to create. It doesn't just waste the creation on one set of things. There are many sets of things. God paints many pictures with one stroke. And so when we're looking at the worlds, we're only looking at the ones that we have experience with. Now, that principle, the very fact that we have to have sprung from the stuff we experience, and the stuff that we experience is the macrocosmic body of God, we have hit on something that is a really big thing. It's something that Christ threw in the face of the priests. He says, "Know ye not that ye are gods?" Because our vehicles are made out of the stuff of God. God is in us, and we are in God, even on the physical level. And our existence, our experience, even the unconscious work that we do of digesting and alchemizing minerals through our body, bringing them in and taking them out, we are actually living parts. We are the expressions, we are the doers of the entirety of the creation. This means we dare not take any being, any object, and look down on it, because it's part of the whole business. We can't look down on anybody. This says even the life of somebody who's comatose for 20 or 30 years is valuable, because the divinity is working unconsciously. Oh, something just went strangely through my mind. Did you read about that case of the woman who got pregnant while she was in a coma? Oh,
She was in a coma for I don't know how many years, and some orderly raped her while she was in a coma. Just how strange things come to your mind. But even somebody who is in a coma is serving God. And this says even if somebody is a criminal, they're still performing. The criminality is a negligible thing that will be ironed out. That the experience and the participation in the divine is something that we cannot look down on anyone, because everyone is providing a necessary service, a necessary function in the ongoing work of the cosmos. So every work is a worthy work. Now, we've been talking a little bit about the dense physical part, the chemical region of the physical world. Let's just look at some of the evolutions that go on in pure matter alone, just as a little passing note. There seem to be 3 different types of evolutions that I can see that take place in the physical world alone. One is an evolution through the elements, that is through the periodic table, which is itself a replica of the entire creation. What could be called the primordial atom, or the divine plan, is replicated in the atomic chart, going from hydrogen to helium, and all of the different stages of evolution are in there, so that the life passing through the mineral kingdom, or we experiencing minerals in our bodies, are experiencing an evolution through all of those steps and stages of the cosmos through mineral experience. A second kind of evolution that seems to be taking place around us is an evolution in the ability to take form. That is, to make compounds, and for those different elements to war back and forth with their different temperaments. As Goethe talked about in the wars of chemistry, where the different elements literally fought with each other and produced such wonders as crystalline compounds and salt and sugar and everything else. The third evolution that seems to be taking place in the physical stuff alone is the ability for physical stuff to interact with the other kingdoms, such as minerals being taken up in soil, for example, or water being taken into the body of plants and animals. Something where the consciousness is being raised from the minerals through interaction or through serving by giving form to the other kingdoms involving in matter. Okay, now we're ready for the harder part of this talk, and that is that the Rosicrucian philosophy agrees with materialistic science in saying that there are 3 states of matter: solids, liquids, and gases. However, the Rosicrucian philosophy says that in the physical world there are 4 more states that go beyond solids, liquids, and gases. They are rarer, they are more active or proactive, they are more inward. Because when we talk about solids, liquids, and gases, we're seeing things. All of us really are materialists. Our consciousness is so geared to material objects that to understand things truly in the spirit is just not capable to us. It's possible, and that's what our spiritual exercises are for, is to free us so that we can get beyond just the mere consciousness of materialism. But basically, we're all materialists. We think about things with beginnings and ends, and our conception of time is very, very limited. It's limited to the movement of bodies rather than to a state of spirit. So we're really not very, very developed at all. So when we get to what the Rosicrucian philosophy calls the etheric subdivision of the physical world, we're dealing with a world that is more inward and something that is more active. Science has done some really good things to take away some of our illusions. Like, for example, we would think that this is dead. This is that deathly consciousness, that solid substance in the material world is dead. But science tells us, no, it's alive and it is vibrant, so that even the most dense matter is living. Now, in order to understand our relationship to the etheric worlds, let's try to be experiential about it. And let's take an example that Max Heindel uses somewhere in the Rosicrucian teaching, and that is the struggles that ensued when the councils of Nice tried to talk about concepts like the resurrection of the body. They tried to decide that when, at the second coming of Christ, the bodies were supposed to rise, how this was supposed to be accomplished. And they got into such things as, was everybody supposed to be resurrected as babies? Or was everybody supposed to be resurrected as old people, as they were when they died? Or were they supposed to be resurrected at the time they took their baptism? You know, it was a very difficult. That's what happens when you have theology that isn't based on science, or that isn't based, even better, on seership. And one of the problems, because they knew about atomic existence, is one of those things. It's like the remember the graveyard scene of Hamlet, when they talk about something that might have been in the body of mighty Caesar might go into an animal and eventually end up as stuff that you stuff a crack in a building with, and thinking of mighty Alexander as stopping the crack of a building so that the air can't come through. The same thing took place at the councils of Nice. Who gets the atoms? Suppose I eat an apple and eliminate it, the elements that were in there, and it goes back to nature and goes through several life cycles. Maybe animals eat it, bacteria we know work on it, and it comes back as another item of food, and Didi eats it. At the resurrection, who gets that atom? That was the question. Now, that it seems to be an absurd type of question, but it is very, very valuable for understanding what we're trying to understand. The Rosicrucian philosophy says that our physical body does not support our etheric existence, but that our physical body is a deposit of our etheric existence. That is to say that the atoms, the solid atoms in our physical body, are suspended. And they are suspended within a lively substance. And this substance has 4 levels of existence, which are called etheric levels of existence, and they provide life and energy. Now, when it comes to this, again, ether is a difficult word. It was first used in the Western world by Sir Isaac Newton when he talked about a luminiferous ether bearing the light from different planets. We all know that 2 physicists, one British, I think the other Swedish, Nicholson and Morley, proved that there is no particulate luminiferous ether. The Rosicrucian philosophy would agree with that and would say, yes, it is true that there are ethers, but they are not particulate in the way that Newton conceived them and was disproved by the Nicholson-Morley experiment. this is in case we have, you're going to run into this. As soon as you hear the word ether and you say it in a scientific crowd, all at once they say, yeah, but what about Nicholson, Morley, and, those sorts of things come up. And those are the people that really need help, They're really locked in materialism, and sometimes you have to talk right into their world. The ethers, oh boy, how to say them. The states of energy or the states of life are significantly different than the grosser states of matter like solids, liquids, or gases. See, there are a lot of fallacies that science has right now. Science thinks that DNA and RNA, for example, have a genetic memory. Not so. Those are forms, just like the minerals that we take in our body, and those are forms that are something like radioreceptors. The etheric the memory is in the ethers. The stuff of this plane, the diribonucleic acid, is of this stuff, and it's not capable of a memory, except if you impress it. You press into something, and that's like a memory. But it's not really a memory, and they happen to be means for transmitting the etheric memory into the physical body. What we're saying is when we're dealing with the etheric realm, we're talking about something that is not only energetic and live and active, it's something that is living. And in its vital life, it has more psychological qualities than the more dead, more brute matter. Now, the notion that there is a life out of which form crystallizes, if you look in most books of biology, for example, I look every now and then, every few years, I look at a zoology text just to see what they're saying. And sure enough, every time in the early stages, they laugh at that and they say the notion that there is a vital life, they call it vitalism, they laugh at that and they poo-poo that and they say, no, that can't be true. It's starting to change now. There is either at Cambridge or at Oxford, there is a brilliant botanist named Rupert Sheldrake. And he is working with what he calls morphogenic fields, which we would call the etheric or the vital body, out of which the dense body condenses. And he has done experiments that seem to indicate that, yes, there is an etheric field, and this etheric field is what precipitates the physical forms that we have around them. In fact, it's such a controversial thing now that someone has offered $1 million prize. $1 million prize to prove or disprove the existence of a morphogenic field. They're trying to turn him into a bad boy mystic and say that it doesn't exist, but they can't disprove what he's finding. So there are some areas of agreement where the nature of the ethers is coincident with the notion of energy to the physicists. Since the ethers are part of the physical plane, they are indeed subject to gravity. So Einstein's experiments about the bending of light, which can be seen under total eclipses, that even light is subject to gravity because the density of the gravitational field of the sun bends light, and you can see that light from distant stars gets bent during a total eclipse. Those things are in total agreement. Yes?
I'm curious. You mentioned that DNA has no memory.
That's right. It is a receiver or a receptacle of an etheric memory.
So how does one clone using DNA?
we're coming to something I'm going to talk about in a little bit. You can produce forms that will hold etheric life. We cannot create life yet, or we cannot bring something to live, but we can produce forms that capture life. For example, we can take denatured chemicals. That means denatured means that all of the etheric has been brought out and they're back to being minerals again, and we can put them together and we can produce viruses. And those viruses will live. And they will live for a very short time, but we haven't created life. What we have done is created a form that mimics what nature creates, only ours just holds life and it doesn't produce a living organism that will reproduce itself. Now, there are things that you can take a form and you can, like you're talking about a cloned form, you can take the essence, you can take the basic structure of that form and you can separate that from the original, and the life is still there. The etheric life is still there. The same thing is true that if you drive it out with heat, you can you can kill it so that it can't live any longer. But there are ways that you can keep forms alive and allow them to. But never if they're heated. You can freeze something as cold as you want, and life can come back to it, provided that the cell walls haven't been ruptured. But heat always drives the life out. Also, there are things that if you're talking about genetic modification, in the same way, I'll give you a terrible analogy, but in the same way that you can hamstring someone so that they can't walk and they have to drag one leg, you can stop certain expressions from coming into the ethers by cutting off a genetic part of the genetic form so that can't manifest.
But you're saying that it's really scientific manipulation.
It's manipulation of form and not of life. And if the form changes, the memory can't work through it the same way. And as far as cloning is concerned, there is only to a small extent that you can change the form. You can't radically change the form and make something become altogether different. It's a very limited thing, because if we had the ability, and I believe that at one time we did, have the ability to literally change the form altogether. In fact, I'll say something really wild. I believe that the Great Pyramid was a form for genetic manipulation, and that I believe that the ancient seers used to look into the spiritual worlds and see the archetypes of the different plant species, for example, and see how they could be evolved to some intended future state, and by the word of power, that taking grains that were focused in that vortex of energy in the Great Pyramid, that they could change the etheric structure so that the grains were mutated in a few generations, because that's one of the mysteries for science, that it takes more generations to take wild grasses and turn them into something useful like oats or wheat or something like that than humanity is supposed to have had. And that's even with very good hybridization. So it had to go fast somewhere along the line. Yes.
Just very briefly, that area is basically a country of limestone.
Yes.
Limestone is much lighter than marble, which after centuries and centuries probably hardened into such.
But the blocks on the inside are marble. Only the outside was limestone, and the outside of the Great Pyramid doesn't even exist anymore. It's been turned into mosques in Cairo. It used to be perfectly smooth on the outside and almost razor edge. But I don't want to get into too many side trips. It will never. All right. Oh boy, I think I'm going to have to cut some things. We're trying to be experiential. The relationship, when we talked about the physical body of God, we said the physical body of God is wherever there is a planet. It gets even more complicated than that when you get to wherever there's a meteorite, wherever there's a crondite or a crondule, quite a bit of the body of God is spread around. But if you ask, where is the etheric body of God, that becomes to be a very difficult question. The earth has a macrocosmic etheric vital body, but the macrocosmic etheric world altogether, it is better to ask the question in the converse and ask, where isn't the etheric body of God? Meaning to say that our relationship to space, or our relationship to potential through space of physical forms, it comes through the etheric realm. If you have ever looked at the sculpture of Rodin, Rodin was a master of relating an object to space. Artists have the conception of negative space. Like this chair, for example, defines the universe, because this chair is positive space and everything that isn't this chair is negative space. And in the conception of negative space is how the physical of our bodies and even of the planets come into existence. This is a very difficult conception. You need what is called a fourth dimensional consciousness. That is to relate to the living womb of the etheric worlds and how that condenses into either a solid object or into something like our bodies is something that there are, I don't know how to say it, life or filaments of energy. There are 3 books that I recommend. One, I don't know if it's in print anymore. It's from the Rosicrucian Fellowship. It's called Etheric Vision and What It Reveals. And it has a very nice little thing that you can prove to yourself in there, that you can begin to see into the ethers. And you relate to the 4th dimension through the 3rd dimension. Ah, boy, there's too many objects in a way. But if you can find a room where there's a corner like that, where the Cartesian 3 dimensions come together, and if the room is not too dark, get yourself in a peaceful way and try to see all 3 dimensions coming together and into one point. Don't just focus on the point, but where the 3 dimensions come together. If you're peaceful enough and you relax your consciousness, you start to see little filaments of spectra, like little rainbows, like cobwebs of light. That is one of the first ways to begin to look into the etheric realms. Another way comes from another book by a mathematician who studied a lot of spiritual philosophy, and his name is George Adams. He's a British mathematician, and the name of the book is called Physical and Etheric Space. And that one is much more like the book that Heindel recommends, but that is if you get in a corner like the one in the corner of the floor, where the 3 dimensions come together. If you put your head right in the corner and look out and try to carry the 3 dimensions out to infinity, what happens is the 3 dimensions carried out to infinity become an equilateral triangle in a flat space. And from that you see how through the 4th dimension, the 2nd, or the flat space, gets projected into the 3-dimensional space. What is important is not only the perception, but working with your consciousness to let go of only seeing things in a 3-dimensional way. Elsa Glover, who is a physicist who used to give talks here at summer school, recommended a book called Flatland. I forget the name. Abbott. George Abbott, I believe it is. That's what they use for physicists to get physicists ready for fourth dimensional consciousness. They get them, they see, somebody in Flatland begins to see in the third dimension, in the magical, miraculous things they can do. They try to prepare them for the fourth dimension. The book that Max Heindel recommends in the Rosicrucian philosophy is The Fourth Dimension by Howard Hinton. And it gives you exercises that are something like looking into a corner or looking out of a corner. See, when they put the dunce cap on the kid, they said they're putting on your thinking cap. They put that pyramid or that cone on him, and they made him go stand in a corner. See, it was a way to bring them to a higher kind of light. If we only knew that. All right. We have to skip a bunch more because I have 2 pages of notes yet, and we're at time. What do you want to do? Do you want to? We haven't even got to the etheric aura yet. Do you want to continue on, or do you want to leave, or what?
We take a couple-minute break, and then whoever wanted to come back.
I would prefer not to do that, because the way it works is momentum gets lost, and people who want to come back delay. All right. Yes.
You mentioned 7 cosmic planes, and I'm sure all your students here have a copy of Cosmic Conception.
Yeah, I mentioned the diagram on 52, page 52 of the Cosmic Conception.
There's page 176. It's a diagram of all that.
Yeah, I'm more interested. What we're doing with this is a simplified version of the stereopticon on page 52 of the Cosmic Conception.
And also, there's the 7th part of that gives all the planets on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're coming to that. Only I'm terribly slow, Bob. Terribly slow. All right. How this is accomplished, I'm going to say something that is very, very difficult. But the way, we're talking about the stuff of quantum mechanics. And quantum mechanics is the most difficult part of physics. It is where energy is turned into particulate matter. We all know that something like a particle or a theoretical particle like an electron is sometimes a wave, meaning etheric, and sometimes a particle, and that it has characteristics of both. From the viewpoint of the Rosicrucian philosophy, the etheric folds on itself or coincides on itself and becomes coincident in becoming particulate. That's a very rough, very difficult thing. It's something like a chicken hatching an egg without the chicken being there or without the egg being there, but just the field of life condensing something solid out of it. It's the stuff that magic is made of. Literally, you see it in special effects in movies. I think special effects in movies, beside the fact that they're taking away good stories, people go to a movie now and they feel if there aren't special effects, they're being cheated. On the other hand, if in the way they make condense things out of an etheric into, like you try to do in your imagination when you're doing something like trying to visualize a healing rose and direct the energy into it. That's made out of light. That's made out of life energy, and that whole imaginative activity when you're deep in your concentration or in your concentrated prayer, that literally what you're doing is the general functions of the ethers, we're coming down to the specifics in a little bit, are energy, activity, motion, change. Anything, whether it be a chemical change or a stone set in motion, rolling down a hill, all of that kind of activity is something that comes from the ethers. Meaning to say that there is life and energy everywhere, and that this is what is provided to the world by the etheric subdivision of the physical plane. Other things that the ethers do are they produce life, vital life, and growth of physical forms. There can be no growth without an etheric vital body. Other things that the ethers do are they transmit experience, and they retain memory of experience. I'd like to go into it because of the question we had before, but I'm not going to be able to because it's a very long thing. Something normally I treat in 2 talks, how memory works, and especially how it works in the ethers, and it's a hard subject to take in just a few sentences. So there are, in the Rosicrucian philosophy, which is not a philosophical statement, it's a matter of observation. That is, people have unfolded the ability to see into the ethers, and they find we can't even see into the air. We can see water, we can see the liquids, and we can see the solids. We can't even see the gases yet, except there's something pretty dense. Some people have developed the sensitivity to actually see into the ethers. There is the chemical ether. There is the life ether. There is the light ether. And there is the reflecting ether. We could say here gases, liquids, solids. These are of the physical world that we live in, these are the 7 states. I'm going to skip a whole bunch here, because some of this we're going to treat on Friday when we get into a slightly different topic. The chemical ether. The chemical ether is roughly what science would call electromagnetism. I don't want to sell out to science because science is basically false in its outlooks. It does very well with the tools that it has, but it is so awkward that it does not understand. I think it's a grave mistake that people like New Agers and things like that try to explain the spiritual worlds in terms of a bankrupt science that doesn't work except for solid material stuff, when you can have something that comes directly out of the experience of an individual. You see, science, there's a little side trip here. Science right now is removing us from evolution. All of our senses have developed in an evolutionary process, and that by interacting with the world, we have become more and more astute in our senses. Now what we do is we build machines to acquire data, and people are using their senses less and less. And rather than refining them and extending them into the spiritual worlds, we are actually becoming less sensitive and using our senses less. Moreover, science is becoming computer dependent, and if we try to solve a problem by thinking on it, we apply our intuition and we think until we have attracted ourselves to the answer. What science does with the computer is brute force, look at all the possibilities and look at the one that is most statistically likely. That is not thinking, and that is not pro-evolutionary. So science is taking us away. They're making some nice machines. They're doing some good things for the mineral kingdom in making those machines. But for the people who need to develop more observation, especially the ability to observe into the ethers and to think directly about a problem and face it, because science tries to get us to evade, that it wasn't so long ago that they said television is going to solve all the problems of corrupt politics, because we'll be able to look at the politician and we'll be able to tell whether he's lying. Now they're telling us the same thing about the Internet. The Internet's going to give us all the communication we want in the world. Why not go out and meet people? People used to go over and knock on somebody's door and we're here for a visit. Let's sit down and talk face to face with each other. Now it's all got to be indirect through the Internet. I work with computers, and that's the entirety of my life, but I'm, hello. But, I'm not keen on them. So roughly then, it corresponds, the chemical ether corresponds to what physical or material science calls the electromagnetic spectrum. It is what is responsible for the chemical interactions. It is how pure form and only form takes place. Because the ethers are not so externalized only, but are as much inward as they are outward, the polarity, the ethers are all bipolar. Whereas things in the physical world, especially our forms in the physical world, we have to be specialized, where we're either males or we're females, because we're isolated or quarantined in this external world only. And so the chemical ether has a positive and a negative pole, which have to do with attraction and repulsion. The functions of what are associated with electrons and protons, but I'm not saying that those are necessarily what the reality is. I don't want to get into atomic theory, or it would get very long. And in the beings that live, the chemical ether takes an even deeper usage. The attraction and repulsion go right into the etheric vital body, and they have to do then with the assimilation. When we make the chemical ether part of ourself, we can then selectively attract to us the nutriments that we need for our body, and at the same time we can consciously repel or eliminate the things that we do not need. Again, this is mostly an unconscious function in us, because we as human beings are more unconscious than we are conscious, at least as far as our relationship to the physical world. So all of the anabolism and catabolism is a function of the chemical ether. If you're feeling uncomfortable or tired or want to go, that's perfectly fine by me. Nothing disrupts me as far as possible. Okay. Not at all. Not at all. I'm just glad that I was able to see the smiling face for a little while.
Hi, Grace.
The formations of the chemical ether in the various chemical elements is really something interesting. It's fascinating. The geometry of how simple poles of positive and negative, how they can be put together to produce atomic states that have different flavors or that have different characters, because certainly the character of sulfur is vastly different than the character of carbon, for example. It's just amazing how you start with a simple electromagnetic energy like that and end up with something that has a character. The science misses a lot, because they don't look into the poetic side of things. Let's very briefly look at the life ether. Nothing except what we talked about Rupert Murdoch's conception, not Rupert Murdoch, Rupert Sheldrake's conception of the morphogenic field, science has no way to deal with the life ether. The life ether is what is responsible for vitality. And to the extent that we have learned to experience the life ether level of physical existence, to that extent can we have a vital existence. This is the stuff that comes from, plants specialize life ether, and this is the stuff of carrot juice, or the stuff of carrot juice at least 2 or 3 minutes old. If it's older than that, it's all chemical ether almost. You have to get it almost immediately when it's just rife, bubbling over with energy. Or when with cow's milk, straight out of the cow, it's just filled with energy. You can feel it bristling right out of your body. It's the stuff of life and of vitality. This is also the stuff of sunshine vitamin D. Now, here again we come into something. If we take the descriptions of Max Heindel, for example, of the description of the vital body, as taken, for example, from Occult Principles of Health and Healing, how the etheric stuff, the flow of life ether, how that invigorates the body, and you put it right next to a simple definition of a vitamin, it fits exactly. Also, if we take the description of the ethers in general, especially the life ether, and like that it can't penetrate glass, and that there's more of it at higher altitudes, and most animals see in that realm, whereas humans do not. And you lay that right next to the descriptions, for example, in Feynman's lectures on physics, you find that coincides almost exactly with ultraviolet light, to the point that if you're familiar with the biochemistry of how sunshine vitamin D works, it is what is called ultraviolet light interacts with a special kind of steroid and produces a provitamin D, and that goes through a chemical process and gets bent, so to speak, and becomes the actual vitamin in your body. So there are correlatives in science if you know how to read science, only they're looking from the awkward material point of view. So the life ether is something that is more rare than just electromagnetism. It is something that allows life to propagate and to grow. No form can grow without life ether. It's like saying, at this point, it's very hard to be explanatory, because it would be much different if we could just point and say, see, that's the way it works. Like it extends itself and it draws to itself, and there is a growth that takes place. This is the stuff of, you can feel that you get thick sometimes in your consciousness when you're ill. It's like a miasma, or it's like the ectoplasm, if you've ever seen a ghost, or if you've ever seen a materializing medium or something like that. It is a substance that can be made tangible to this plane. And this is why the mediums are usually left terribly weak, because all of their vital energy has been used in some kind of external demonstration. Very quickly, passing on to the light ether. The light ether is a state of existence that is rarer than even ultraviolet light. It's something like what physics calls the photon, meaning that it always goes at the speed of light or more. And the light ether is literally what carries light. It has two primary functions in the beings that have specialized it. Just like the positive pole of the life ether has to do with the positive action of procreation and the negative with the negative pole, and the two of them together make for cell division or make for replication. The light ether is also bipolar. In fact, the further you go into the spiritual worlds, the deeper the polarity is, so that the light ether is associated with the transmission of light and all of the pictures that are in the light, or everything that light carries. From spectroscopy, for example, we can look at a distant star and we can see what all the minerals are in there, and if we could get a big enough magnifier, we could see everything that was going on in that star, because it carries through space. And the light ether, like when we have the breath record, everything that's happening in this room as we take breath by breath by breath is right in the light itself, and we can see into that. And, there's a big difference between the memory we have in our waking conscious memory and sometimes the other memory we get when we sort of float loose and we're living back in our childhood again, and the experiences have things in them that you never even realized at the time that you were living them. This is what is transmitted through the light ether, the light and everything that is carried in the light. At the negative pole of the light ether is coloration. That is the receiving of light or the sensing of light or turning the light into a color. Like this is what makes the flowers colorful. It's what makes the chlorophyll green, is the action of the light ether as it works into the physical body of the plant. The positive pole of the light ether is also responsible for stirring things into action. In humans, it is responsible for driving our warm red blood, and in the macrocosmic earth, the light ether drives the life ether up and down as the seasons go. Like the etheric force in the northern hemisphere is driven by the light ether upward and outward, and all of the trees come to life because they don't have the warm red blood that they can do their own circulation. So the heat and the driving force has to come from without, from the light ether, and that causes the energies to rise. And in the southern hemisphere, then things are diminished. You see, with Aussies always have things backwards. That's the way. Yes, you're upside down. Let's talk a little bit about the reflecting ether, because we're way overstayed, much more than I ever wanted to be. The reflecting ether is even more exceedingly bipolar. It has to do with thought and memory. In fact, it's so bipolar that there are people who are specialists, like mnemonists, for example. Mnemonists are people who can memorize hundreds and thousands of things. There are books that are biographies that are written by mnemonists, but they don't do the writing themselves. They have somebody else do the writing because they can only work with memory. If they're supposed to, if you give them 2 or 3 pages of a phone book and then ask them to read them back, what they do is they use the reflecting ether, and they say, "Oh, I just looked at it like I was walking down the street, and the name, everybody's name was on the post office box, on the post box out in front." And that's what the way the negative pole of the reflecting ether is. It is a place that you impress images or pictures. The pictures from reality or the pictures from our creative thought get impressed on the reflecting ether. And it's so much so that a person who is a mnemonist cannot function logically. And if you function highly logically and you haven't developed the negative pole of the reflecting ether, there is no imagination. In fact, I even know physicists who teach courses on physiological, medical physics, that teach that imaginations are static. All that counts is the invisible logic, because they don't even they believe that the pictures are like superstition, or that it's like electromagnetic static in the brain. And so, to some extent, this is hemispheric. One hemisphere of the brain is more in touch with the reflecting ether in that it's more pictorial, and the other is more for linear logic. And so all beings that are capable, which represents human beings mostly, that are capable of memory and thought transmission, that is dependent on the amount of etheric energy of the reflecting ether that they have been able to attract into their bodies. So what is an aura? We've gotten a little ways. We know now that we have a physical body, and that this physical body does not support life, but that this physical body is suspended in life. And in the Rosicrucian philosophy, that which suspends the physical body is the etheric aura. The etheric aura is much more unified than the solids, liquids, and gases in our physical body because of the interpenetrability. And the chemical ether in our body approximates the chemical reactions. It is identical in size to our physical. The life ether is in our physical body, and it extends slightly beyond. It has an aura of energy or a field of energy. And it is the matrix wherein our physical body is built. That image, that force, or that life that can be manipulated just like you can manipulate magnets with other magnets. If one is in control of etheric energy, can manipulate that etheric form, that matrix, so that the physical condenses one way or another. So the etheric aura, as far as the life ether is concerned, is the size of the physical body, but it extends a little beyond. The best place to see the life ether aura is in those long walkways in airports, where you have the backlighting, which is not strong, and you walk along and you'll see that everybody has around them, surrounding their body, a little bit of light, sort of like they have an extra cropping of hair coming around them. On the other hand, the light ether is dependent on how much we have driven our blood. That is how much we have volitionally served. To the extent that we serve voluntarily, and to the extent that we serve by perceiving, by looking at reality, to that extent do we attract light ether. It's a very practical thing. The more effort you put forth into the world, not necessarily purposeless effort, but self-conscious, trying to help the whole thing go along, the more light ether you have. And that you don't even have to be etherically clairvoyant to see that. You look at some people, and they look fuzzy. They look, like terribly dishonest and scuzzy types of people. Whereas you see some people, they're suspended in light, and they're pretty to look at, even if the features don't look pretty. They're beautiful, And it actually, every time that you do something from the goodness of your heart, you attract more of it. It's literally like spinning gold out of straw. I had a friend years ago that was a involuntary clairvoyant. In fact, she was so psychic that they were going to build a research institute around her. And then, through me, she came in touch with the Rosicrucian philosophy, and she decided, I can't do that. And she had a lot of psychological problems, and demanded a lot of care. And I don't know if I shouldn't tell tales out of school, but...
You already started.
All right. A very beautiful man from Madison, Wisconsin. Some of you know him, Edgar Anderson. He used to be on the board here several times. Helped her when she was in great duress, and she was really a pain to deal with. And he just loved her, and she saw a little bit of light go and spin into his aura and then disappear, and it was just a little lighter. That is how the light ether is developed. It did a lot for her life because she's had visible evidence of what service means or what it does. So the light ether extends as much as that far out from the body, and it depends on how much you have looked at the world with eyes of appreciation and awe and have looked at it with great detail. Anybody who sits down and draws for about 3 or 4 hours and looks in great detail, looks and looks and looks, when you walk away you start seeing everybody looks beautiful and you can see their faces are suspended in light. The reflecting ether depends how much of that we have, depends on how much we think. The thoughts do not have to be any specialized kind. They don't have to be mathematics or symbolic logic, or they don't have to be of the humanities. They can be completely creative thought like no one has ever had before, like writing your own poetry or something like that, or having your own peculiar way of looking at the world. But if you think, and if you remember, especially in such a way that you remember and draw the essences of the pictures from the light through the reflecting ether, then you attract more of the reflecting ether to yourself. And so the etheric aura, the reflecting ether is seen within the light ether. I don't know how to say it, but sometimes you see inside of a picture that something is within something else. The best description I've ever seen of it put into words was by Emanuel Swedenborg when he talks about you look at a being and then suddenly inside or behind that being is yet another being, and behind that yet another, and it's like right within the light all of the pictures are and all of the thoughts are. We've been a half an hour over time. I'm sorry. We'll try to be a little better tomorrow. And let's close with the Rosicrucian prayer, but I'm going to be exacting this time. I've noticed over the years that when people recite the Rosicrucian prayer, they pluralize too much. When we say, let the words of our mouths, that's a good plural, but the meditation is supposed to be singular. The meditation of our hearts. We're all supposed to be uniting in the same Spirit, the Spirit of Christ, that one universal love. So today, when we do the Rosicrucian prayer, let's say, let the words of our mouths and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight. I believe that that's the grammatic way that it is supposed to be, and certainly the spiritual way. O God, increase our love for Thee, so that we may serve Thee better from day to day. Let the words of our mouths and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable in Thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Well, you survived.
I'll get a 3-hour pay for the next one.
No. Please, no clapping. You know, clapping destroys the thought forms you've just created.
I'm wondering,
What?
if God created Adam and Eve, and the name Eve means light, do you think Adam should have been spelled A-T-O-M?
I'll pass on that one.
Enjoyed your talk.
Yeah.
My name is Headhead, R.D. Headhead, but Jacqueline started calling me Doc about 27 years ago.
Yes.
You're going to be here for the whole 2 weeks.
For the whole 2 weeks.
Yeah, it'd be good to, when you're hang loose.